Okay, everyone, thank you for joining me on this for this lecture entitled Buddhist Psychotherapy, Reuniting the Twin Streams of Science and Spirituality in a Degenerate Age. Before I start, I just want to give a word of appreciation to Embodied Philosophy for all their tremendous work. These conferences appear so effortless, but of course behind the scenes there are amazing people doing amazing things to make it happen. So I want to share my deepest appreciation to Embodied Philosophy for partnering with the London Institute in order to make this conference happen. And really, since the beginning, a conversation with Jacob, Kyle, and myself, we were exploring the idea of this conference, and it really came out of both the recent publication of a book by my colleagues and I at the Nalanda Institute, the Advances in Contemplative Psychotherapy book, Accelerating Healing and Transformation with Dr. Joe Luizzo, who's offering the keynote address to this conference, and my wife and partner, Emily Wolfe. That book is recently published this month and contains within it what we aspire as a kind of true integration between Buddhist psychotherapy and Western psychology, health research, and neuroscience. And in the spirit of that offering, we wanted to take a big step back and kind of evaluate where we are in time and place. And it's a real opportunity to evaluate the history and the genesis of such a book. And of course, there are tremendous challenges that are happening on this planet, which I think all of us can agree to. And as these challenges emerge, there's also what I would consider a potent opportunity for all of us to reevaluate exactly why, how, and in what way we're going to deal with them. And I truly believe as conscious beings we have a tremendous opportunity to advance culture and to face challenges in a successful way if we are good students of history, and if we reduce our hubris and our exclusivity and really open our minds. So in that kind of spirit, I think we came up with this idea of giving a platform to various practitioners who, like us at the Nalanda Institute, really aspire to create integrative networks between ancient and modern, between religious and spiritual and scientific, between East and West, in order to offer something much greater, more purposeful, and more visionary, more inclusive, and more exceptional than any one of those traditions or one half of those dualities could offer on their own. And just in our own backyard, when I started envisioning this process with Jacob and his colleagues at Embodied Philosophy, it was so clear to me that even in our own backyard in New York City, we had a plethora of amazing, talented, visionary practitioners to choose from. And I think this conference will really showcase some of the exceptional quality of skill and talent, but also the amazing vision and warm-heartedness of some of these practitioners. And I'm so delighted that people like Lena and Dr. Kokai and my friend Samit down from Florida and some of the amazing other practitioners are going to show you such a diversity of how people are blending East and West and ancient and modern so successfully. And I think it's really a testament to where we are in time and place. So with that as a kind of backdrop, I just want to now kind of give you some more of an impressionistic kind of description of where we are, where I think we are. And a lot of these are my own musings and my own meanderings, and because I'm probably a very unknown entity, I don't mind sticking my neck out and putting my foot in my mouth and saying some uncouth things. When you're a nobody, you have nothing to lose. And so I don't mind shattering some of the mainstream opinions and pushing back on our culture. And so it might be offensive to some of you, and frankly, that would be okay. I think it's okay to be controversial. And I think at this point in our history with so many challenges, keeping myself silent and not pushing back on what I think are some of the major problems, I wouldn't sit well with me. I have an obligation to my two children and to my students and to this planet to really call out some of the unsavory features that I think are challenging us, and even if they actually go against some of my mainstream opinions or my mainstream conditionings and my mainstream educational conditionings, it would be remiss of me to not confront those things. So with that in mind, what I want to do is cover three broad topics. And again, it will be more impressionistic. I'm not going to give you any particular case study or detail about my own practice as a Buddhist psychotherapist. We can reserve that probably for another time. But I really want to take a sort of bird's eye perspective on three basic rubrics or three basic constellations of topic and go into them slightly. And the first one is what I mean by our degenerate age, which I think will probably not be so mysterious to most of us. The second one is what I call the age of reason, where I really think this unfortunate split between science and religion actually occurred, and I would like to really talk about the drawbacks of that time, that sort of pivot in history, because I think therein lies some of the obvious reasons for why we see some of the features of the degenerate age. So in a way, the degenerate age is a symptom, and my comments on the age of reason is really looking at the causes. And then I would like to propose Buddhist psychology, what Buddhism and psychology can learn from each other as a kind of synthesis or solution. So that's really the arc of the conversation that I'd like to present. So let's begin with the degenerate age. So I don't think I need to go in depth too much, but what I see on the most global level is our climate crisis, and we have at this point, I think anybody who's denying that there's a climate crisis is definitely have invested interest in maintaining the status quo for profit. And I think point blank, anybody on that side of the argument is making bank at the detriment of future generations, millions of species, the planet at large, and everybody living on the planet right now. But what we see is these reinforcement contingencies between sea level, sea temperatures, the melting ice sheets, the lack of reflectivity that's available on the white ice sheets, environmental degradation of forests, massive pollution in the waters. What we'll inevitably see as time progresses is more and more flooding and drought, severe weather impacts. And then I think what we will see is what we have started to see in Syria is that there will be a major climate refugee situation. In fact, there are some scholars that say that the Syrian crisis, before it became a political one, actually started as an environmental one with severe droughts in various regions, sending more and more people into the metropolis, into the cities for work, which then became, and of course when major different kinds of people with different ethnic and religious orientations come into heavily populated, densely populated places, trying to fend for their own families and children's, what you have is a kind of pressure cooker. And so I think that as an impetus, I think is a very dangerous thing to the equilibrium of the planet. And so I think just on the environmental level, there's real pause for concern about what that might look like as things heat up and we have more fallout in the environment, and what its impact on people will be. And I don't think any of us in an interconnected world can really escape those factors. So we have a degenerate age where the climate is deteriorating by human-caused intervention. Okay. The second one is the great economic divide that I think is so clear for most of us, that we are now, for the first time in history, of course, greed has always been part of human culture. However, the divide has become so extreme and so polarized that we are now looking possibly, some of the research that I looked at from an organization called The Rules, which I encourage anyone to look at, with their director Al-Noor Lada, an sacred activist, Al-Noor Lada, and the Rules. Their published data shows that as few as 8 human beings on the planet collectively have more than half the bottom half of the population, have more wealth than the bottom half of the whole population of the planet. And that, to me, signs or signals that something in the economic structure is amplifying the ordinary afflictions of human greed. In other words, there's always been greed, as long as there's been humanity, but that signals to me that something is at play in the economic system that is allowing or green lighting an enormous amplification and permission for very, very few to benefit at the expense of so many others. And I think the 2008 mortgage crisis and the situation of the bailouts of the banks and the golden parachute phenomenon and the Occupy movement, these are all a cross-section that something is incredibly awry on our planet, not just locally in the United States, but all over the world. That there's something very insidious happening, and that it is we have a deep, deep need to look into the matter carefully and look at its origins and really invest our energy in seeing if we can do something to shift it. Because it's not real, the 99% versus the 1%, it's more like 0.001% dominating everybody else. And so that is what I would consider one of the main afflictive points of the degenerate age. I then that is closely intimately tied to the political regimes that are growing more fascist in our country. All I have to say is Trump for that. Just that word alone, and those like him, Putin, Erdogan, Kim Jong-un, and Duterte. There are a number of fascist global entities and their oligarchs that are certainly hell-bent on using power to dominate the planet and using their, and using social structures like owning the media and the news and the information, owning legal institutions so that they can make laws that actually benefit them and surrender our powers of control, especially in democratic societies. So I think that these things have pushbacks like the Arab Spring and have pushbacks like the Occupy movement, which are incredibly important for lovers of freedom. And so it's important for us to analyze the root causes of those things and to question why is that happening on this planet right now, and to see if we can come together as conscious beings to see if we can intervene, and not to become disenfranchised and paralyzed, but actually to become mobilized and exercise our agency. And I guess one of the last few ones is the loss of spiritual culture on this planet is a sign and symptom of what's actually happening in another area of the world, in the biosphere and the animal kingdom. We are losing species at a rapid pace, plant and animal and insect species dying out, becoming extinct because of various variables and factors. But I think this is also happening in culture. I think as we move to more consumeristic culture, what we are seeing is a dying out of wisdom cultures across this planet. And that is a severe loss, a major, major loss that I think is going to impact us if we don't put an end to that, and if we don't intervene quickly to preserve indigenous cultures that may actually hold within them medicines, knowledge, wisdom, traditions, legacies, insights that could actually help us as we go forward in our evolution. If we risk losing them, I mean, if you see, one of my partners in Toronto, Marco, who is both a therapist, Buddhist meditation teacher, and also a wisdom keeper of the native culture of First Nations people. At one time, there were tribes that he was very, very connected to that had disintegrated to the point where in one car ride, the last remaining wisdom elders of that tradition, holding their sacred language and their sacred knowledge, were in a car with him, and he had the thought that if that car were to get into an accident and they were all to perish, along with them would go an entire legacy of an ancient knowledge. And I think that is a very dangerous prospect for us to consider. And my last point to this degenerate age, if you can stomach it for a few more minutes, is the fact that I think most of us feel so utterly disconnected, so utterly disenfranchised, apathetic. And I think this is one of the hallmark features of consumer capitalism, for example, that renders us or makes us into nothing more than batteries for production and consumption. And I see people in my therapy practice, good, well-intended people that feel depressed, but if you look at their global lifestyle and the culture in which they live, they have been reduced into producers, manufacturers, and consumers, and have lost touch with some vital component about their sensibility as a human being living in a matrix of of interconnected relationships with other humans and the planet, and that has been deprived from them. And of course, that will naturally lead to a sense of utter existential angst and despair. And then what does my industry want to do is pump them full of medication. So I think we have a severe indication there of a degenerate age. Just not only the symptom, but how we end up dealing with it is a byproduct of a deep, what I call philosophical or paradigm illness, which I'll get to in a minute. So that, I think, just broadly paints the picture of where I personally think we are. Now, my colleagues at Nalanda Institute, Joe Luizzo, in his wisdom, would temper all of that. I think he has a much more optimistic perspective that comes from his time researching what is called the Kalachakra tradition of Tibet, which is a beautiful archaeology and archetype, mythology and psychology that places us in time and place historically, but insists that we are actually, some of the challenges we're facing is actually part and parcel, intimately tied with our consciousness, the burgeoning of a greater consciousness, which I do hold, which I do share in common with him. However, I'm not scared to put in people's face and remind them just how bleak and dire some of our situation is, in order to actually mobilize them and actually to confront them into considering the origins and the causes. So that's my intention here with presenting that.